Trust in Jesus, it's gonna be right. Everything's gonna be alright. Just hold on, hold on. Everything's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be alright. I know that everything's gonna be alright. I know that everything's gonna be alright. I know that everything's gonna be alright. That everything's gonna be alright. I know that everything's gonna be alright.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Spotlight Conversations. My name is Thandie Balfour, your host for the afternoon. I am not alone. I've got a whole panel full of learned, experienced people who are going to come and share their knowledge with us. Today we're looking at disability, and we're looking at everything disability, but within the context of us being Christians. So we want to explore what does it mean to have a disability, to live with a disability, and what impact has church had on yourself as a person who's living with a disability, or someone who's a caregiver, or someone who's living with a disability. So please remember that we are live. Post your questions, your comments, your thoughts, and send them early so that we can get a chance to actually address them and attend to them. I'd like to introduce my panel. So as usual, I've got to my right Umfundisi Ngosi. Welcome, Mfundisi.
Thank you very much.
And then I've got to my far right, Sister Prudence. She said she's known as Sister Prudence, so those who know her will know her. Welcome, Sister Prudence.
Thank you very much.
And then to my left, I've got Brother Nimrod Donga, and he is a member at Calvin on Ethel, and we'll find out soon how he ends up on this panel. Welcome, brother.
Thank you so much, Thandie.
And then to my extreme left, we've got Dr. Nomfundo More, who specializes in speech and audiology. Also a member of our church. Welcome, sister.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to start with you, Nomfundo, to just say, when we talk about disability, what are we referring to?
Thank you very much for that question. So, like you mentioned, when you talk disability, we talk about a broad spectrum of people who are differently abled. And I think that is what we need to emphasize, because the moment we talk about disability, we are actually limiting them. We are saying there are things that they cannot do. It may be true, but if the environment is done in such a way that they have access, they wouldn't be disabled. So you'll find that it's our attitude, how we view their condition, that disables them, and how we also prepare our environment that disables them. We have policies in place that talk to disability and how to accommodate it, but implementation is very questionable. So with that in mind, we then need to actually look at how do we phrase this in such a way that a person who is differently abled to you is able to participate just like you do in everyday activities. And the moment we appreciate that, we then take the responsibility as each and every person to make sure that that person has access. Because when we are looking at disability as your problem, which is what the medical view does in most of the times, then we are saying, it's your problem, sort it out. But when you look at it socially, we are saying it is our problem, and what can we do to make the situation better? So when we then look at disability, we need to look at, it can be physical, it can be sensory, it can be cognitive, it can be hidden. So these are all the things that we need to think about. But at the end of the day, it is people like you and me who just do things differently. And we all are different, and we need to appreciate that. Just because a majority of us do things the same way, it doesn't mean that those who do things differently, even though they're in minority, then we stigmatize them, we marginalize them, and see them as different to a point where even participation for them is hard.
Wow. Okay. So I just wanted to, and thank you for that correction. So it's people living with a disability or people who are differently abled. That's the correct term. All right. I also read somewhere a terminology about special needs. Is that politically correct to say someone with special needs?
Yes, it is. If anything, that is what they would prefer. You will see that, I mean, in the past, we'll have schools for people who are disabled. But now that has changed, and we now, like with inclusive education, we now look at learners with special educational needs because we're saying everyone has needs. That is why, I mean, we start at a certain grade and we learn and we grow. But there are people who need more attention than others. So we are, and it's special in a sense that we put in place accommodations to accommodate that person. That's what makes it special. But it doesn't make it special in a sense of being weird, because that is what others sometimes say. The moment you say special, then it means I'm weird. But actually, it speaks to the accommodation that needs to be put in place so that we are able to accommodate the person. And also, just to highlight something, sometimes we say disabled person. There's a problem with that in a sense that you must first see the person, which is why you were talking about a person living with a disability or a person who is abled differently. First see the person, and then whatever else that the person has follows. Because the moment you say disabled person, the first thing you think of me is disability. So all my other capabilities are out because you've disabled me. But the moment you say person, you allow me to be. You embrace me for who I am. And then all the other characteristics or components that come with me then complete me.
So the labels that we put on people determine how we actually approach them and how we actually deal with them. Sister Prudence, let me bring you in here. What's your area of specialty and how did you land up there in that area?
I wouldn't say, okay, hi everyone. In the deaf people, they will know me as Sister Z, which is short for Nozipo. And so I'm not a specialist. I'm not. I'm a nurse. This is my work. I'm a nurse. But I have love for the deaf people. So I do sign language. So this is how I come to the people with disability. There's different disability. I can work with different people, but I love and I am working with the deaf people.
Where does that love come from? How did you actually end up with such an interest that you end up learning to sign even?
Okay, when I was a little girl at home, I met a lady. Her name was Sister Gwen, and she taught me on how to sign. So then years back, we were signing with two hands. So it will be an A, it will be a D. But now we're using A, B, C, D. So I would take my small chair and I would sit next to her, and then they will be preaching and I'll be sitting, then I'll be writing. Then during lunch when we're eating, then she would be teaching me on how to sign. So then I would be learning the sign language. But as the years go out and they are growing, then I forgot. And I just but when I was doing the preaching in Pretoria, that's when my love for the sign language, because I met a guy, his name is John, and he was deaf. So I went to school and I started learning the sign language.
Wow.
So now I'm including it. I'm doing an inclusive healthcare. So what is an inclusive healthcare? It's we're not talking about them and us, and us. No, we're talking about everybody in the same place. So the center is looking at how can I look at you and look at the deaf person at the same time without making you feel disabled. So if a deaf person come to the clinic, I interpret for them. I do not need the second person to be in there. So it's me, the nurse, and my patient. Because now it gives them the privacy, because the first time I went with the deaf person to the doctor, it was, you hear the secret things that they don't want people to hear, and now they will tell me, and I will tell the doctor. So now as a nurse, I'm saying, you as a deaf person, tell me, I'll understand, and I'll interpret and sign back to you.
You know, you've just raised such an important thing. I've never thought of it, because when I think of medical care for people living with disabilities, I always think in relation to that disability. I don't think beyond. They still need to see the doctor for other things that I need to see the doctor for, and that doctor, like you said, may not be able to sign. And I need to say to the doctor somehow that I've got a headache, and the doctor can't sign. So it's quite integrated. You're right, it is quite integrated, because it's the entire person, not just that particular disability that we're referring to. Mrs. Nomfundo, let me bring you in here again. Can you just take us through what are some of the causes of disabilities, just common causes of disabilities, so that our audience at home can have a sense of, this is not just everyone being punished by God.
Right? I'm glad you started with that one, because I was wondering if the church is ready to actually talk to those ones, because, I mean, we can look at medical, like what happens. That one is easy. I mean, there's evidence, there's science. We can speak to it. But socially, when we're now looking at culturally, we look at different things. And what has been hard is then how the church, for instance, I mean, given that we're talking in a church setting, how do we reconcile a person who says, my child is disabled because they were bewitched? So before we even deal with the case for what it is, we want to tell you to know there's no such thing that your child was bewitched. Or we can then have what we've been reading in the Bible. I mean, to an extent we can say, but people cannot blame us for saying that, because even in the Bible we have instances where people will be asking, did their parents sin for them to have a disabled child? So now we are having to try and, balance these views as to what exactly causes disability. And also what becomes important then is how you see the world, the lens. So, because if I'm cultural, for me, witchcraft is going to be what I believe. If I'm Christian, maybe it is a curse from God. But then how do I then speak to the next person in my eyes who is sinning day in and day out, but everything is fine? So what kind of God am I talking to? And then when you come to the medical part, that is easy. So disability, sometimes it may be congenital, and by congenital we mean you are born with it. So maybe when the mom was expecting, for instance, they contracted German measles, and because of that, then the child may be born deaf or blind or cognitively challenged because of what they were exposed to in utero, so while they were still in the womb. Or sometimes it can be acquired, where soon after birth, especially we see that with premature babies, where they're still too small, they can't breathe on their own, and then they are put in the cubicle, and those interactions become too much for the child, and then they end up with disabilities. But sometimes because of trauma, where a child can fall, and in the falling, depending on how they fell, then that traumatic experience ends up with a disability. So in the medical sphere, we can talk broadly about that. And then, I mean, also being involved in a car accident, so we can talk to accidents and we can always be able to trace. It just becomes tricky when we then now trying to reconcile that when we're looking at the cultural view and the church setting, which is why then it's much easier to say, let's look at the social setting where I don't really need to understand why your child has a disability. I need to understand what needs doing now. Because instead of attending to the disability or to the problem for what it is, I'm going to try and talk you off your beliefs. And that's going to take a lifetime, because also how you see things and how you understand them is how you're going to interpret them, and is how you're going to seek help, which is why in most cases you'll find that people who hold a cultural view, they will go to a traditional healer first to seek answers, because that is how they make sense of their world. A Christian will go to church and pray and ask for answers there, because that is how they see things. Doctors will turn to their books and to medicine and Google and all those many things. So to try and address that takes a lifetime. But what we then need to focus on, here is the condition. How best do we all deal with it, and how best do we make sense of it? Does it really matter how we got to this point?
And I think what she's saying is so important, because it talks to acceptance, that we need to accept that it is. When we try and figure out how we got here, maybe that's also still part of denial of the fact that we are here now. Brother Nimrod, let me bring you in here. So you're a parent who didn't start off with a child who had a disability. Can you maybe take us through your journey of what happened, and also just where you are now and where you were then? I mean, your life was changed, when this happened.
Thank you, Thandie, for the question. Well, as you know, Busisiwe is my daughter. She's 21 years old now. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, Busisiwe, at the age of 10, was going a Hogsburg in the Eastern Cape for a school camp. And at the school camp, we got a message that she's not well. And, we picked her up from the camp, and we were told that, no, she is extremely sick. So we took her to Cecilia Makiwane Hospital, Monti, and they couldn't attend to her. We ended up, which hospital is it? Is it Bay Hospital? I've forgotten the name of the hospital in Monti. So now when we get there, we are told, her situation is extremely bad. We later learned that she had a very, very bad condition, ETTP, thrombotic thrombocytopenia purpura, and she had a bad version of it. To cut the long story short, Ubusisiwe ended up having 2 strokes. The 2 strokes, the one affected the left side, the other affected the right side. She slipped into a coma. She was in a coma for over a month. And she was written off. The doctors told us that she will not make it. And God being God and being gracious, Obusisiwe turned around. And I remember that particular day, the Calvin Church was praying for her on that particular day, the day she came out of the coma. And then when she came out of the coma, there was a battery of tests that were done, and to cut the long story short, she was discharged from hospital and ended up in a rehabilitation hospital. And being in a rehab, it's a very, very expensive situation. It costs a lot of money. And unfortunately, she couldn't continue because of the resources. And after a month, she had to come out, and we had to take care of her at home. And for a child that was brilliant, able-bodied, running like other children, it was a challenge. It tests the person's faith, it tests the person's abilities, and you really do not know what to do. And you just rely on God. And right now, Obosisiwe at the age 21, it's been a roller coaster ride, because we spend much of our time in hospital, saying to it, she gets seizures and stuff like that. And she now has a cognitive injury, because her brain does not function the way it's supposed to. Added to that, she's not able to do things on her own. She relies on people for her day-to-day living. So it is a challenge.
Is she, what do you mean by that? Is she paralyzed?
No, well, that's the other thing that we go to the doctors to try to get. When you go to the doctors, and the doctors, they say there's nothing wrong. All the tests say everything is okay about her. and she can't stand up, she can't move, particularly from the waist down. Now, she cannot sit without support. So, yeah, it is a challenge. I mean, taking a bath is a challenge. Changing clothes is a challenge. Putting her into a car is a challenge. Getting her out of the car is a challenge. Going out shopping and doing that is a challenge. And the biggest challenge sometimes is people watching. You know, the steering, you know, you feel like that's why some people do not take their disabled relatives, children, whoever is in their lives in public. I have made a resolve that I will go wherever Wusisiwe needs to go. And I am not ashamed of my daughter. And some people, unfortunately, because of the trauma associated with the person that they are taking care of, they get shy. They do not know how to handle it. Stuff like that. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Mfundisi, let me bring you in here. So, Brother Nimrod mentioned the fact that the church did pray, right? And we'd like to take credit for that. Didn't think it's because we prayed that she was fine. But broader than that, to your recollection, what has been the engagement of church when it comes to people living with disability? What has been the role that church actually plays, whether deliberate or not?
Thank you very much. If I was a child, I would start weeping now. I'm saddened by the weight of what I've heard. And I'm comparing it with the universally recognized normality of faiths in the world. Christianity is presented as a faith that deals with those who are normal, not those who are off normal. I don't want to use the word up because it comes from the Greek prefix that refers to negativity. Absent, abnormal. You see those prefixes. I'm seriously epistemically challenged by the fact that we could not deal with disabilities in African culture. We surrendered them to charlatans. Today is my knowledge now is different from the knowledge of my grandfather who grew up in the traditional Zulu context, who referred everything to Inyanga, Isanus, and so on. It's strange that in African society we used one treatment for all ailments. Do you get the point? Of course, I know the historical reasons. We moved away from the center where biblically informed community. But I have a feeling that we need to doctor our theology now. Our theology needs to deal with the consequences of the Edenic fall. Because there are so many and multiple, and the devil has not only multiplied them, he has made them complex. So that whilst we are believers in God, we end up wondering if there is a God, if there is this type of situation before us. You get the point? Yeah. I'm struggling now as you are speaking with the whole epistemology and the mission of biblical organizations like churches and so on. How have we so marginalized those who should not have been marginalized? I'm thinking of a guy like Mozart, a German musician, who was a genius, but in his time they did not see that. They thought he was abnormal. I mean, he was buried by 5 people. Because the community didn't want to go to his funeral because they didn't understand his music. That young man staged a concert at the age of 12. Started composing at the age of 6. And when he died, he was buried by 5 people because he was abnormal. You get the point? And I think the world has been designed for the comfort of the mean. Your 40 to 50% people. And not those who are below and not those who are above. Get the point? And the other thing I told our assistant at the beginning of while we were meeting here was that in the space station in the United States, a lot of youth who are employed, they're autistic. Because autism is not ultimately a disability. It's an alternative form of intelligence. Yeah. And some theologian was speaking, making a joke somewhere, said, it is possible that angels could be autistic.
Mfundisi, I'll come to you, His Presence. just on your point, I was thinking as you're talking, could we perhaps be influenced by Darwinian thinking of survival of the fittest, and so that's what we focus on, is then the best and the fittest, and that's what we want to move in terms of our genetic pool and all that they say. But what's interesting is that as a church body, and I'm talking to us now as Christians, we've got examples of people living with disabilities that were used by God in the Bible, who God didn't other them. He basically used them. So we talk of Moses, who says, I have a speech impediment, and God says, we'll make a plan, right? There is, Leah, who was identified to have a sight issue, which I don't know whether that was just Jacob's wanting to otherwise. Jacob, who gets into a fight with an angel, who ends up having a limp, right?
Yeah.
He lived the rest of his life with that disability. Mephibosheth, who was dropped at the age of 5 because they were running away from. So there are people who get mentioned, and the disabilities that they're living with get mentioned particularly. So where did we move away from that to getting to other them, specifically as us as Christians?
I'm convinced, I'm not even thinking, I'm convinced that we have not, we Christians, especially in the conservative churches like Adventism, have not run the whole trip of discussing and analyzing the nature and extent of colonial epistemology. Because it is in our epistemology that we respond to things. When I see a snake, I run because this thing is going to bite. I get happy because I might get the poison from that thing and use it for my trade. You get the point? So I think we need to make a confession today that missionaries brought more of European epistemology than Christianity. They inserted Christianity into an epistemology which was foreign to the Bible. Which is why today we have to battle with European art, even from a church that claims the truth. You get the point? Because it is commercially viable for the GC to be spreading a white Jesus, white disciples, and all these things. And I think we're dealing today with one of the central issues of what it means to be a believer in God, because it is by faith that people are healed in the Bible. Do we have enough faith to say, be ye healed? Can our handkerchiefs be used to fix diseases as it happens in the Apostolic Church in the New Testament? You get the point? So I have a suspicion that we're running a church of dullards. We're all dull. And these things are beyond our intelligence, ultimately.
Yeah, so Mfundisi never disappoints in telling it like it is. So for you who's watching at home, please remember we are live. Send your comments, send your questions. Time is running out, so I don't want you to now say, well, I didn't know. We started, we invited you. Sis Prudence, you wanted to say something before I cut you off?
I'd just like to say I'm happy with the church. There is a positive part of it. From 2015, we began with the sign language. We began with the disability program that we were following. So I'm really happy that in 2017, we went to Kenya. And in Kenya, we learned and we formed an association for interpreters, but also for the blind people, but also for the disabled, for people on wheelchairs. So it's different. So yes, the GC came. I'm happy that Pastor Larry Evans came and said, we know that in South Africa, we have a person who's interpreting. I was interpreting in my little corner, and he said, now, in 2015, we're beginning a program of awareness. So 2015 to 2020, it was awareness. But I am sad as well that up to this time, we are still on awareness. What do we do?
I'm further saddened by the fact that it was only 2015
Yes.
when this came into being, a church that's over 100 years old, even more. Oh, there goes my maths. But it was only 2015 that we even thought, let's formalize this, let's start, because as you're saying, it's been happening in small pockets of interested parties. But for the church to actually say, okay, let's formalize this, let's start something. I mean, I was reading on the website as well that, and then in 2017 they had the worldwide conference that now
Okay, yeah.
establishes this. Mfundisi, I want to come back to you because you raised something interesting there. So the way Jesus dealt with disability was to heal people, right?
Yes.
So we have a lot of examples of Jesus healing people with whatever disability that they were actually living with. And with the disciples carried on with that as well. Like you said, even just the shadow, as
Yeah.
they were walking past, would actually heal people. And then what happened? I mean, I don't remember, and maybe it's just me, I don't know of such healing happening in the Adventist church. I've seen it on TV with other churches where people, and then they fall, or they end up carrying the wheelchair that was carrying them. But I don't see it being emphasized or being out in the open in terms of healing, not living with, but healing it. Am I just misinformed?
I don't think so. I think as African Christians, we have taken Adventism too lightly, with all its Euro-Western flaws. You see, Christianity was captured by the rationalism of the 16th to the 18th. Post the Reformation, the devil threw rationalism into Christianity, particularly in Europe, and that's when you begin to see your rationalism moving into psychology, sociology, and all those things. Until we now have universities that don't recognize the existence of God at all. Unfortunately, this thing has affected Adventism. Recently, the church almost shut down a university in the United States because in the biology department they were teaching evolution. Adventist professors, so some had to leave. They were told it's time to leave. This how well. I won't tell you the story behind it. It's a long story. But I am, as an African a person who's conscious of the fact that the world runs on epistemologies. I'm telling you. So our epistemology is defective. It cannot deal with the complete gamut of what it meant to fall into sin. What are the results of sinfulness? Our sin did not only create theological aberrations, it created psychosomatic aberrations, physical aberrations. It affected nature, it affected climate. You get the point? It's a whole very broad and universal thing, this thing called sin. The devil, unfortunately, reveals it to us in installments so that we don't see how big it is. It is a little bribe here, another bribe there. I think this program needs to be able to face the totality of the human fall and come with solutions that deal with those things that further mission. As Nozipo has just told us, that there are attempts now by the church to fix at least some aspect of proclaiming the gospel. We don't have a school for the disabled in our church. You get the point? Yeah. All our education is for those who are so-called normal. Some of whom are not that normal.
We don't have leadership.
We don't. Yeah, that's the challenge.
Well, interesting that you raised that because the Pastor Larry Evans that you've referred to, I was reading on his website, possibilityministry.org. Please go check that out. And he was interviewed in 2018, and he says that at that time, he said there's only one deaf pastor in the world, Adventist pastor, one deaf Adventist pastor in the world in 2018. So then you think, so all the other people with either sight or hearing or whatever other disabilities are not interested in ministry. Is that what it's saying? Or is it saying that our environment does not actually accommodate for them? I mean, when we look at the stats, right, South African stats right now, and this was 2020, says we have about 7.5% people living with disability across the spectrum. And there's more prevalence in women in terms of percentages, not even just in terms of numbers. And then this increases as it increases with age. And this is compared to the world stats, which is by the World Health Organization, which says the world basically has about 10% of people living verified with disabilities, and up to 15% in terms of some level of disability. Dr. Larry says only 1% of people who identify as living with disability identify as Christian. Only 1% identify as Christian. That's an indictment on us as Christians, right? So let me bring you in here, Nimrod. Apart from the church praying for you that day, what has been in the involvement of church in terms of supporting you and supporting your daughter? And please feel free to let them know what your experience has been.
Yeah, wow. Wow. Thandie, you really want to know? Well, okay, well, Calvin Church has been good to me and my daughter, Ubusisiwe. Now, when you come to Calvin Church, for instance, Ubusisiwe, going around to different classes and stuff like that, it was a challenge. There's a ramp outside that leaves from that entrance going through into Office Kamfundisi. And it made it easier for Ubusisiwe to go to the classes down there where the youth have their classes.
Can I just say that that ramp has no rails, though?
Well, as we were talking about that, I was going to bring it up that, well, maybe it's the finances and stuff like that, but it's a start. Now, I would think what Calvin Church is has some form of disability-friendly facilities. For instance, now with a toilet, there is a toilet for people that are on wheelchair. Now, there is a parking bay for people that have got disabilities, abasebenzisa i-wheelchair. Now, look, church helping, how? What do you mean by that?
I don't know, but I'm thinking you're part of this community. So beyond making the buildings somewhat friendly, the needs are beyond just that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there have been pockets of excellence here and there. Some people that have really sacrificed their resources to say, Nimrod, here's a diaper here and there. You know, adult diapers cost a fortune. If you're going through, let's say, 60, 70, or 90 diapers a month, calculated, a packet of diapers is about 450 rand. And, you know, wipes and stuff like that. It is indeed a challenge. And, well, I thank God I've got a job and I barely manage. But I'm thinking of a person in the situation that I'm in and not having the resources that I have. That could be a challenge. And I also think in life, each and every person that walks in through those doors have got something that they are going through. So to expect people to see this, some people are waiting for you to go to them. And it is a challenge. And, you know, sometimes, you know, you think, let me go to Sister Thandie. Sister Thandie, I've got a problem. And I am short of diapers. It's difficult. It's very, very difficult. But now, how would you know that I've got a diaper problem if I haven't come through? So it takes both parties to be able to address that. So now, I see the problem as that of not being able to communicate with people. It's difficult. And it's a challenge, and you have no idea. I wonder what goes through into Boss's mind, right? Because whatever she goes through, I go through with her, right? And sometimes, like I said, she has got cognitive challenges as well. You know, you find a 21-year-old sees Ubusisiwe as a 21-year-old. And then when they communicate with Ubusisiwe, they say, but there's a problem. Then they start judging her. They move away from her. As a result, she's one of the most loneliest 21-year-old because people cannot relate to her. And when she plays with children that she can relate to, at the end of the day, they think, but she's older than us. We cannot play with her. The ones that are older than, that are her peers, think there's something that is wrong. And it is indeed a challenge. The church, I do not know, maybe I'm to blame. I should have gone to the church and say, hey guys, there's this challenge, I need help here and there. It's a two-way street, I think.
I think it's just being nice and being very Christian. Sis Nomfuno, let me bring it in here because what he's mentioning is the accommodations the church made as in, oh, okay, she's in a wheelchair, what can we do? and those were the accommodations that the church actually made. But what else should we be aware of? Like, I mean, things that he's mentioning now that we don't think about. What are some of those fundamentals that we should be sensitive to and be aware of without it being in our face when it comes to people living with disabilities?
Sadly, we will get to actually think about that when it is facing you in the face.
True.
Like, I don't think before Bosisiwe Wuti Kelvin had all these accommodations, you know? So the question is, when the world out there has these accommodations, what is the church doing? I mean, when you're looking at schools, we talk inclusive education regardless of where the school is. And the Department of Health is forced to accommodate learners with special educational needs. Same thing with healthcare services. And the one place where people from all different walks of life should be accommodated without question is the church. But we don't do anything until one of our own. You see, that is where it matters, like until it happens and then we can see that it's here, then let's do something. And also it depends who in the church, you know? So then we'll start putting measures in place. I mean, it is good that we are reactive, but we could be proactive, you know? And also there are disabilities that are hidden that I was talking to. Like for instance, a hearing loss. When I walk through this door, you do not know that I've got a hearing loss. And there you are enjoying yourself, talking, and meanwhile you're wondering why I'm looking at you. For all you know, I'm trying to lip read what you are saying because I do not know what is happening. I see people laughing and having a lovely time, but what is happening? If I walk in with my cane, then you know, oh, she's blind, let's do something. So disabilities like your deafness, which we cannot see, those people end up not coming to church. And it's quite interesting that you were mentioning that in 2015, only then we started thinking about interpreting in South Africa. I had a privilege to go to Kenya in 2016, and I went to one of the biggest churches, and standard without question, they have for every session an interpreter. And we are better resourced than Kenya. So what are we doing? Where are our resources going to? You made an example to say, no, the ramp doesn't have the rails on the side. And then you said, no, but it's starting. You know, you were kind, like, you know what, it could be resources. There are things we've done in the church that we've prioritized. We could have then made that a priority. But because it wasn't something that is close to our hearts and it's not affecting us more than it affects you, then also you see and say, you know what, at least the church is receptive to a point, and then you want to excuse things for what they are, when in actual fact, you shouldn't even be saying anything. We should be seeing what is happening. And as a church, we clap together and say, there's a situation here. How best do we deal with this situation? And then we do what we can. But we know, it's what we're saying, it becomes your problem. And then we don't want, until you tell us, how are you supposed to know what you need? Because it's your problem. But if it became our problem collectively, you wouldn't even have to say anything. We would be there in a heartbeat to say what needs doing. But also we should be learning from that to say, now we have made accommodations for people with wheelchairs, but there are other disabilities out there. And I was reading, like, we conference, they have a section where they're looking at, they don't call it disability thing in ministry, but it's around those lines where...
Possibility.
Yes. So where it's actively like engaging with day-to-day needs of people with disabilities. We don't have it here. Are we saying it's because we don't have any people with disabilities in South Africa? Or are we saying it is because God is merciful, He has healed everyone? No one seated here has a cousin or a person with a disability. Or is it one of those, you know what, let's leave you at home like we're saying, because people are staring. I'm being stigmatized, I'm being marginalized. So I don't want to put myself in that position. So it's one of those where, are we saying in church, no one has a disability because God has been merciful and took care of that?
But to add to your point there, as South Africans in particular, we have a constitution that has outlined how to, I mean, I've worked in corporates where even before they hire someone with a disability, the whole building is friendly. So by the time a person comes who gets hired, it's not, oh wait, what do we do now? Where do we start? The building is friendly. There's certain regulations that are just in place that are accommodating of a person. Should we have a person with a disability, this is already in place, this is already taken care of. Shouldn't churches have the same mindset, Mfundisi? Shouldn't we be saying, I mean, if we're saying come one, come all, then we should have structures and spaces, let alone the mindset, that is already ready for this all that we're inviting.
It's a fact. It's a real fact. I doubt if I've been as touched by this topic, by topics that we've covered in the past as this one has touched me, because I'm trying to trace my history in the church, things I've seen, people who are disabled in various ways other than autism and their fate. I know friends who are albinos in the church, they've disappeared from my sight. I don't know what happened to them.
Can I correct you?
Yes.
Friends who were living with albinism.
Yes. So thank you. You see what diseased, even in our language, yeah. So we label things instead of describing things. Yes. I think the ship has hit rock bottom now when it comes to how we minister to those who are differently able. Those we describe as disabled. You get the point? Because the fact is they're just as intelligent as us. And some of them are more intelligent than us. Yeah. I went to school with somebody who was albinic in Ladysmith. This boy had to sit alone next to the blackboard because he couldn't see clearly. And each time I visit Ladysmith, I'm told he just ended up nowhere. No one knows what happened to him. So I think we need, first of all, the Christian community, let me talk to the Adventists. We need to confess that we have failed to take care of the totality of humanity and the totality of the manifestations of the fall. The result is that we have provided ministries to those who are normal. Schools are for those who are normal. Hospitals are for those who are sick, but not those who are psychiatrically ill or disabled, physically disabled. We have over-embraced a model imposed by us by historically Western thought, secular thought about the definition of what it means to be human. We're carrying a Bible, we're reading it, but in its application we're using a model from another kingdom. This is the struggle I think global Christianity is facing. It reads the Bible, but its application is determined by humanistic models. Which is why I can be a Christian and be racist. I don't see I don't see the contradiction. I can be a Christian and be an ageist. You get the point? A hater of another gender and so on. And yeah.
Mfundisi, just to cut you off there, I just want to remind everyone at home that we are live. Please send in your messages. Please send in your comments. Mfundisi, I found a quote by Sister White, Testimonies for the Church 3, which I thought maybe informs our thinking. So she says, I saw that it is providence of God that widows and orphans, I like that they get put in here as well, the blind, the deaf, the lame, and persons afflicted with a variety of ways have been placed in a close Christian relationship to his church. It is to prove his people and develop their true character. So that's the first thing. It's about those who are normal abled. Angels of God are watching to see how we treat these people who need our sympathy, love, and benevolence. This is God's test of our character. If we have a true religion of the Bible, we shall feel that a debt of love, kindness, and interest is due to Christ in behalf of his brethren. And we can do no less than to show our gratitude for his immeasurable love to us while we were sinners, unworthy of his grace, by having a deep interest and unselfish love for those who are our brethren and who are less fortunate than ourselves. So there's a number of things that disturb me by this statement. Whilst I think I get what she's trying to say, it's the othering
of others,
the
yes.
others. It's them.
Them against us.
And so God puts them to test us who are quote unquote normal, that are we going to show up and show this love of God to them? Isn't that just, indicative of our mindset? When we do then engage, it's because we're engaging out of sympathy, because shame them, they need some help from us who are normal.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a statement that I've never made before in my life. The missionaries brought degraded Christianity. Something that was tarnished by their epistemology their views of the other, the Africans, the dark skin, darkness belonged to the realm of evil. You get the point? And therefore, you know what, the devil cooked a theory that could be fed from all sorts of angles and still remain as dangerous theologically, spiritually, and physically as any other poison. And what we need to do now is to sit down as a church in Africa and say, what is the scope of the effect of sin? Let's create a missional program that deals with the totality of the consequences of the fall. If these things were caused by the fall.
Mfundisi, I want to come in there and read to you instruction from Leviticus 21 by God through Moses. It says, it's Leviticus 21 from verse 16. He is talking about the Levites. So this is the background. He's talking about how they should choose Levites. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, say to Aaron, throughout their generations, none of your descendants who have any physical defect shall approach the altar to present food, the food of his God. Verse 18, for no man who has a defect shall approach God's altar as a priest. I'm reading the Amplified Version. No man who is blind or lame, who has a disfigured face or any deformed limb, or a man who has a broken foot or broken hand, or a hunchback or dwarf, or one who has defect in his eyes, or eczema or scabs, or crushed testicles. No man amongst the descendants of Aaron, the priest, who has a physical defect and is disfigured or deformed, is to approach the altar to present the offerings of the Lord by fire. He has a defect. He shall not approach the altar to present the food of his God. He may eat the food of his God, both of the most holy and the holy of things, but he shall not go within the veil or approach the altar, because he has a defect, so that he will not profane my sanctuaries, for I am the Lord who sanctifies them. Yeah. So this is God giving instruction to Moses to give instruction to Aaron in the Levitical line. He's saying, down the line, all your descendants. Can you really then blame Christians for wanting to seek perfection?
They've failed to misunderstand the history, the epistemic argument God is placing. He is saying, I did not create abnormality. I created normality. Embrace them in the totality of your ministry, but they shall not serve me, because they do not represent what I had created. They represent the consequences of a fall. But we should not read this to mean they cannot be taken care of.
But that's already disturbing.
But that is what.
Yeah.
But that is what I'm saying, that now we're talking about inclusive churches. We're creating inclusive churches, we're creating inclusive communities, inclusive healthcare system, different, but everything should be inclusive, because we are saying we are different, but can.
Yeah.
So I think I still want to point this to say, I cannot then blame someone who says, well, the priesthood has to be perfect, because God in Leviticus says, and maybe that's why we only have, till 2018, I don't know if it's changed, we've only had one deaf pastor in the world, is because, well, the priesthood has to be without blemish.
But then you go to Jesus, he sits with them, or with the physically disabled.
He actually fixes them, because he heals them, so he fixes them.
The challenge I have with this text, is not this text, but a church that has no care for those who are outside of its scope of what it thinks is normality. We're using the term normality, that the understanding of that has been defined by secular epistemology. For instance, the word normality does not exist in the Bible. I've read the Bible through. That word does not exist in the Bible.
Actually, the word disabled, sir, is not in the original Bible. Also, in terms of the Greek and the Hebrew, there's no disability as a term. Prudence.
I think the other problem that I have, as I've been working with the church for the past 15 years, it's money, the budget. Every time I'm asking for something, I'm told about the budget. There is no money for the interpreter. Interpreter is very expensive.
I don't know if there is no money full stop, or there is no money for
We need a
certain
braille.
things?
We need a braille for the blind people. You know, I meet patients. They say both of us we are blind, and you give us a prescription, and you say once a day. So I have to go next door, so that they read for us.
Thandie.
So we have lots of things that we do, but we never do them in the braille. We never do them in audio so that they can hear. We never have an interpreter because you can't have things that we need to learn about the disability. Remember, you can't have a deaf person who's sitting for 5 hours listening to a sermon and an interpreter who is one in that day. So if you go to Kenya, you have 4 interpreters. In every 15 minutes, we're changing.
Wow.
But in South Africa, there is no interpreter because we don't have
budget.
money.
I'm so sad that we've run out of time and we need to start wrapping up. My bosses, they are telling me to start wrapping up, and I want to have the job next week. So I'm going to give you all a chance to give your final thoughts on this topic. And I think we've only just scratched the surface in terms of what we need to do, especially us as a church. So I'll start with you, Sis Nomfundo. Your final thoughts.
You know, when you called me about this, I said to you it's about time that church actually spoke to these issues. And I'm glad to have started the conversation. I mean, I'm even wondering what prompted this conversation. But I think, like you're saying, we've just barely scratched the surface, and we haven't really done much on this. So my thoughts are, we actually need to have a deliberate engagement as the church. What is our stance when it comes to people who are differently abled to us? And isn't this the place where they should be welcomed? Why are we still reactive? And having said that, I also want to commend Calvin Church to say, you know what, it is easy to also point fingers and say you could have been proactive. The fact is, something has been started. We may not understand the reasons thereof, why they were started in a way they were, but you'll find that there are other places where there is no change. Even when we see people who are different from us, and we just hope they will disappear or someone else will take care of them. So we must commend the church and for actually asking the questions. But we need to go back and look at our policies and see how we're doing things differently. Like we're saying, there's only one pastor. How do you know? Did they even come to Africa and ask us, or they talk about from their own experience? So whatever informs the GC, they believe that that's the status quo for everyone. Because also I read an article where they were documenting different disabilities within the church. And I was wondering, I don't ever recall as a church member being asked when they're doing that survey to say, what disabilities do you present with? But suddenly we have that document that says that. Is it representing us as the whole congregation as far as Adventism is concerned? Or is it speaking to the GC?
Yeah.
But having said that, the fact that we're having this conversation is a good step. It shouldn't end here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Your final thoughts on this?
People living with disabilities are people.
Yeah.
Wow. Sis Prudence, your final thoughts on this?
I'm just sad that I'm here again talking about awareness.
It's time to move.
15 years after, and we're talking about awareness. I think it's our 3rd time, and I think now it's time to do. Yeah. It's time to do. It's time for action.
Exactly. Mfundisi, your last words.
There are 3 things the African church must reconsider. 1, the harm caused by Western biblical epistemology to mission in Africa. 2, the institutional culture of Adventism refuses to recognize anything outside its campus. Finally, because of that, its missional model does not deal with the totality of the human condition.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'm going to call you back again because we do need more time on this. And to you viewers at home, I'd like to thank you for your time. I want to remind you that the Bible calls us to be the heads and not the tails. And it seems in this incident, we being led by the world, we are running behind human rights that the world defines instead of actually leading and informing what those human rights are. But as my speakers have said, we shall not give up. We've started, so we need to move it forward. So may you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thank you for watching.
Trust in God. Let every everything's gonna be alright.
Bambelela kuzolunga.
Everything's gonna be alright.
Everything's gonna be alright, my friend. Everything's gonna be alright, my friend. That everything's gonna be alright. Oh, that everything's gonna be alright. Trust in Jesus. It's gonna be alright.
Everything's gonna be alright.
Just hold on. Hold on.
Everything's
Everything.
gonna be alright.
It's gonna be alright.